Please close your eye for a minute and imagine this. If it were your own child, your niece or nephew, waking up to a world where children playgrounds are underwater, schools are flooded, and their friends nowhere found because they have gone missing in landslides. Picture family having to leave their home in search of food and water. Picture of children bearing the brunt of this harsh reality. Now you may open your eyes. This is the reality for me and my peer. สบายดี I am C. Sawan, and it is an honor to speak in front of all of you. I am a change maker, and I am standing here to represent countless children and young people in Asia. This is the not future that we fear. It is the reality we are living. Climate change is not a new headline, but it falls behind devastating floods, landslides, extreme heat, and water, and drought that forcing many children and families to flee and children to suffer. especially the most vulnerable. Let me tell you a bit about me, where I come from. I grew up in northeastern in Laos, and climate change. My family depends on farming, but climate change bring drought and floods, harming our crops. When I was 14, my mother explained why we have to move from her hometown to another province. We faced with financial difficulty because our farm was not producing enough due to severe drought. There was not enough water to sustain our crops, leading to significant losses. We had to sell our cow and buffalo to relocate instead of better life. But unfortunately, the situation didn't improve much. Climate change has made the challenge even more unpredictable and severe. In 2018, our rice field usually gave us 23 bags of rice, but it dropped it to just 9. With less rice, we have less income, and it became more harder to put nutritious food on table. During this hard time, my family managed by making more plant-based dishes from our home-grown vegetable, and including this a special dish called Jiao Nha Ai. Jiao Nha Ai is made by drying pickled vegetables that are grilled and crushed into a magic powder. This is not just a food, it is a symbol of how we adapted, and it is a labor of love from my mom. And however, this is a reminder to me of our family resilience. During this time, it saddened me to see my brother give up his education, swapping book for brick at construction site. He worked very hard to support us for a year. At that time, he just only 17 years old. And my family had to sell our land to get him back to the school. But not everyone was as lucky as my brother. I have seen girls, my classmates, drop out at 14 to get married, or boy working to fight poverty. And I am so grateful and thankful for my family in which way we were able to adapting while we were going through this challenging time. And however, I realized that adaptation of those most affected is not enough. We need to do something to fight climate change. How? We need to act. A, awareness. We need to understand about the issue and our role in it, even as young people. And I am a freshman studying environmental science. I chose this major because I would like to learn more about environmental problems, especially the climate change. And C, change, be the same that you want to see, is a classic saying, and this is true. Change can start with a small action in each of our daily life, like avoiding single-use plastic or wasting less food. The key is to make this small change consistently, but a bigger collective change can start now with all of you here today. Ask yourself what you or your organization that you represent would need to do better differently to better protect the most vulnerable who affected by climate change and being negatively by effect of climate change. And P, take action. Change our own habit is great, but inspiring others to do the same thing is also important. I volunteer with social, environmental, education, and development, or SEED, a group at my university to advocate, educate, and encourage people to take action against climate change. And just recently, through World Vision Young Mind Camp, I was a part of a core group facilitating on child research about climate change. together with my peer across 6 countries in Asia. And we're so happy that we just have finished our data collection and analysis at our country level just last week. And once we finish our finalized at regional level report. And I'm so excited, and we're so excited to share with you as well. And I hope that you will look forward for it. And moreover, I believe that you will use it inform your work. And now, how many of you would like to and agree that we need to act? Can I see your hand if you agree that we need to act? Great. And how many of you would you like to try my gel in your eye? Can I see your hand? Wonderful. You can try with me during the break. Yes. And let's take guests. I would like to say sincerely thank you for your coming. Your presence today speak up of your commitment to help us, especially the most vulnerable ones who are affected by climate change. We find hope in knowing that dedicated professional and organization care about what we are going through. As young as we are committed to act alongside you. Count me in, count us in to taking action. So we make sure that this simple joy stay in our life and in the life of future generation. Thank you for your attention. ขอบใจ
Good morning. And I really want to echo C in saying thank you all for coming today. I think the turnout here and the participation online really goes to show the level of commitment to addressing the issues of climate change and migration, particularly as they affect children in this region. My name is Lindsay Ruffalo, and I'm the Director for External Engagement for World Vision in East Asia. So we come together today as an international community committed to upholding the rights of vulnerable populations, especially children, in the context of migration and climate change. On your table, you have 2 QR codes on either side of the triangle, and one has the agenda, and the other is a link to the report and the website where we house all of the resources attached to this particular report. Following on, I would like to just have a quick look at the agenda. So very shortly, our colleagues from the Stockholm Environment Institute will present the key findings and recommendations from the research. And then we will invite a panel of external practitioners and policymakers to discuss with us and reflect on that research and what we're seeing and its relevance to this region. And then finally, before we conclude the event, there will be an opportunity for all of you to ask questions of the research team, of the panelists. That will include those on the virtual chat room, as well as all of you here in the room. So please do think any questions that you have as we go along. We will have time for that toward the end. So one last point, our event today is being recorded, and we do have photographers in the room. By attending this event, you acknowledge that your image may be used in representing and promoting this event externally. Unfortunately, our regional leader, Terry Ferrari, is very unwell today and has had to send her apologies. I know she was really looking forward to being here and being able to speak with many of you as well. But I would like to invite Dan Matonga, who is the World Vision Regional Director of Programs, Evidence, and Impact, which includes research, and Niall O'Connor, Asia Center Director for the Stockholm Environment Institute, to share opening remarks. So Dan, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Welcome and appreciation for all who took time to join in person as well as online. The climate crisis is one of the greatest forces shaping our world, both present and future. None of us are immune to this fact. However, the reality is most acutely felt by those families already living precariously close to the edge. Just one drought or flood away from the tipping point, as so powerfully highlighted by C through his own experience. Thank you, C, for sharing this. In the face of an increasingly volatile environment and too few options, many are compelled to migrate in search of alternative livelihoods. In some cases, children join their parents, in others, they remain behind. And in most desperate of circumstances, it is children themselves who set out to provide for their loved ones. This report that we are here to launch today, Climate Change, Vulnerability and Migration, the impacts on children and youth in Southeast Asia, is so much more than just a report. This is an accumulation of the lived experiences of 92 children, young adults, parents, and caregivers from Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, whose families have been disrupted and reshaped by migration. As you listen to what is shared here, I hope you picture their faces, each individual, and recognize them as people who have weathered tremendous hardship, but who still carry the hope of a brighter future for their children. We share in this hope. Since 1950, World Vision has remained steadfast in our commitment to uphold the rights of the most vulnerable children in Asia through our development, humanitarian, and advocacy programs. Understanding and responding to the unique needs of children in the context of migration is increasingly critical to our ability to effectively serve the most vulnerable children in this highly dynamic, rapidly urbanizing region. The success of our mission also relies on effective partnerships. Today, I am particularly thankful for our partnership with the Stockholm Environment Institute. Together, we sought to present the consequences of the vulnerability, climate change, migration nexus for children in this region without losing the deeply moving human element at its core. I think we have achieved that. On this note, allow me to invite Niall for the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for that. It's a pleasure to be here. Although when you say it's a pleasure to be here, it's not for this particular event, given the content and the challenges that we see a lot of children facing. So we'd rather not be here to talk about it in reality, but so be it. We have to face it. And it's nice to be here with everybody today and to make sure that we're hearing your thoughts and opinions on this. So please do engage in it. But if I was to start, I'd say it's impossible to kind of ignore the growing urgency of our time, and that is climate change and the impacts that we're getting from climate change. It's no longer that distant threat we were talking about for many years. It's climate change is around, 20, 30, 40 years. It's here, it's now, it's impacting everybody. Some of us may not feel it as much as others, but we'll see from the stories here today, people are feeling it with their lives, and it's something we need to address and work with. Whether it's changing climatic conditions, which is impacting on agriculture, agricultural production, which is leading to poverty and increased poverty in many cases. Whether it's the issues around sea level rise and the impacts it's going to have in urban areas and the massive movement you're going to see of people because of that. These slow, often disasters, or these sudden onset disasters from floods and from droughts, these are really impacting far beyond we can imagine. They are impacting the children that you're going to hear from today. They're impacting all of us in so many ways. So let's really take this quite seriously. The report that we're launching here today also reveals how environmental pressures and migration are drastically changing the lives of all these young people. It paints a clear picture of the tough challenges that they face and the injustices that are there. And we want to make sure that in this period when they're in the middle of this crisis of climate change, poverty and marginalization, that there are many of us who can be there to support and to help and to try and get them through that process. You just heard earlier that many of the people, let's say the parents are moving on to try and find work to support their children. Often over 1 million children here in this region are moving as well in migrating patterns to find better livelihoods. Often, unfortunately, this is changing their lives forever, and generally it's not for the better. So again, we realize that it's a horrible kind of result of challenges that they face brought on by climate change, which is brought on by fossil fuels. So we do know there are solutions. We just have to address them. Every child in this case then deserves a safe and a supportive environment in which to grow up. If you look at my own children, We have the privilege of them growing up in a safe environment. The stories that we heard and C's story earlier, we all know we don't want any of our children to face that. So why should we let anybody else's? We need to address this and address it seriously. And we'll hear throughout kind of the research that Sarah and Dionne and Claire from our team have done, how this has affected people differently and how it's profoundly troubling reality in terms of the children's livelihoods. They're separated from parents, they lose access to education, they're exposed to exploitation. All of this is kind of desperately impacting their future livelihoods. So whether they stay at home or whether they leave, children's well-being are being impacted, and this is a risk to all of them for their futures. For many of you who don't know SEI, we're a kind of global research to policy think tank. We want to bring evidence-based science to the table to help people make decisions. So as Dan said, in partnerships, we want to support organizations that have the right science, the right evidence in developing programs. And here we want to try and influence how policies change to support long-term sustainability and support children's livelihoods into the future. So for today, I suppose we want to make sure that everybody is understanding the heartfelt plea to recognize the serious challenges that are ahead of us. And we want to make sure that we're building a future where we have hope and joy for children, not just they're surviving, but they're thriving. It's critically important. So we hope that this report sparks conversations among all of us. I hope it strengthens collaboration amongst partners and amongst the government representatives and civil society that might be here. And as we was saying earlier, we need to act now, not in the future, but now. And I think together we can create real opportunities for children and youth to grow, to ensure that they don't just survive, but indeed thrive. And we need to support that. So thank you, everybody, for this. And I was going to end by saying I want you to enjoy the event, but that doesn't sound right. I want more than that. I want to make sure it touches your heart and it touches how you want to react and respond to this in the future. So it is critical, it is real, and it is today. So thank you.
The climate crisis is a children's crisis. The effects of climate change and environmental degradation will define our lifespan and last beyond our lifetime. Nearly half of the children in East Asia and the Pacific face 5 or more simultaneous shocks, meaning our region is the home to the highest proportion of children impacted by climate-induced and environmental hazards. In a region where nature's beauty and abundance should be our birthright, we are growing up in an epidemic of destruction and pollution that is destroying our land, poisoning the air we breathe, and contaminating our waters. The impact of climate change has lifelong detrimental on our physical, mental, and emotional health. It is destroying our homes and livelihoods and threatening our future. We have had enough.
Нэг гэдгийг ойлгомоор байна. Мөн хог хаягдлын менежмент хэрэгцээ зохицуулалтыг сайжруулж өгнө. Би ирээдүйд
ឲ្យឯងនឹងបដងចាក់បំពល់ផ្សាយនិងកុំឲ្យចោលសម្រាមផ្ដេសផ្ដាស់
2ก็คือเราต้องการให้องค์กรท้องถิ่นสนับสนุนเด็กอย่างเต็มที่และทุกที่ทุกทางในด้านการปลูกต้นไม้และการปลูกต้นไม้
We are fighting for our future and we call for action.
我希望世界各国领导人推动更多的人关注气候变化，并共同提议对气候变化帮助那些受气候变化影响最大的人。การมาลงมือปฏิบัติในเดี๋ยวนี้นอกจากแปลงดินฟ้าอากาศและสูงอากาศต่อพวกเราอยู่ประเทศลาว保护好我们的地球，让全球的儿童都可以健康成长。
At World Vision, we are in the fight with and for children. We believe that every child has the right to both a healthy and safe environment today and a sustainable future tomorrow. We are committed to working with children and their communities to better anticipate and prepare them for risk, to improve their ability to recover faster from shocks, to build their capacity so that they are equipped to adapt to the changes in their environment, to help them move to clean and energy-efficient technologies so resources and practices. The children have spoken. Let us listen and act on their call for solutions to both impacts and causes of climate change. Better resilience to climate-induced challenges, stronger green education, spaces to advocate for climate action now. Don't let children carry the burden of the climate crisis. The clock is ticking. Climate crisis cannot be ignored anymore. So, what will you do?
So to echo Niall, all of these programs that World Vision implements and aims to implement in the future in this region require good evidence to inform them. So now it's my pleasure to invite up the researchers who are going to be presenting the research key findings and recommendations. So first, I'd like to ask Dr. Sarah Vigil. She is a senior research fellow at SEI Asia, leading SEI's migration and mobility program globally. Her work focuses on uncovering the deep connections between climate change, migration, gender, and human rights, using political ecology and feminist approaches to drive equitable policy outcomes. She will also be joined by Claire Steiner, a research associate in SEI's Asia's Gender, Environment, and Development Cluster. Her research centers on the nexus between climate change, migration, and social equity, with a particular focus on rights recognition and governance in Asia and the Pacific. So please, Sarah and Claire, the stage is yours.
Good morning, everybody. It is a great honor to be here today to present the study, which has been the fruit of a very good collaboration with all of the team and World Vision, particularly in this region. I'm particularly thankful to my co-authors, so Claire Steiner, also Dayun Kim, Daryl Flores here in the room, and Marion Davis. This morning, we'll provide a very brief overview, share some of the key findings, and discuss recommendations. Many more details and stories of these children are available in the full report. So, first of all, why did we do this study? We know that climate change is already having severe impacts on vulnerable people in Southeast Asia and contributing to labor migration, often in distress. We also know that many children stay behind when their parents migrate, and many children are migrating themselves with and without their parents. We know what some research suggests are the impacts on those children, but what we wanted to do was to hear from them directly and from parents and their caregivers. Our goal is to see migration in the context of climate change from the perspective of these children and their families, and to learn how governments and the international community can support and empower them. What was it that we set out to learn? First of all, how big of an impact is climate change having on the poorest and most vulnerable communities, including their livelihoods and their decisions to migrate? Secondly, what are the real-life impacts of parents' migration on children who stay behind and on their caregivers? Thirdly, how do different factors shape the migration experiences of parents and children, from destinations to outcomes? What do these children and their parents' caregivers aspire to, and what do they say they need to achieve it? And last but not least, can we translate those insights into concrete actions that policymakers and the humanitarian community can take? So the methods of the study, we conducted extensive background research, including to inform the site selection. We focused on 2 villages in each country, Cambodia, Laos, PTR, and Vietnam, all with very high socioeconomic vulnerability, known climate impacts, and increasing migration trends. We conducted 92 in-depth interviews with children, with parents, and with their caregivers. And we conducted 30 interviews also with community-level leaders. Remotely, we conducted 12 interviews with experts and practitioners, plus validation sessions with the World Vision teams in Cambodia, Vietnam, and Lao PDR, without whom this work would have been impossible. So thank you very much to those offices and teams. We know that Southeast Asia is a very dynamic, unequal, and diverse region. There has been significant progress in human development, but very large gaps and disparities remain both within and across these countries. Cambodia and Lao PDR, for instance, still have multidimensional poverty rates above 16%, compared to just 1.9% in Vietnam and 0.6% in the main destination country, which is Thailand. Climate change is worsening disparities, pushing people deeper into poverty and forcing many into distressed migration. But it's important to acknowledge that vulnerability does not just fall from the sky. Cambodia and Lao PDR actually face less severe climate hazards if we look at climate projections than Thailand, though Vietnam is the most exposed of the four, but they are a lot more vulnerable. In other words, it is not the magnitude of climate hazards that can explain distressed migration, but how these underlying vulnerabilities are magnified and exacerbated by climate change. In terms of policy, we have a deeper policy analysis in the report, of course, but just to say that, for example, Cambodia has prioritized climate adaptation with attention to children, to women, and marginalized groups. However, the link between climate change and migration and its impact on children is missing from their policies. In Laos, climate policies have not significantly addressed gender disparities or the needs of children and youth, nor have they connected climate change to migration. Vietnam stands out with a national adaptation plan that explicitly connects climate change and migration, aiming to improve the situation for disadvantaged groups. They are also ahead in child protection, particularly around disaster risks and pollution. This does not mean, however, that there are not significant challenges that remain to be addressed in Vietnam. While policies addressing climate adaptation and vulnerable groups exist, they remain very fragmented. More importantly, the capacity of governments to effectively implement these policies is often limited to financial constraints and other problems, leaving critical gaps, especially when it comes to the interconnected challenges of climate, migration, and protection. Without further ado, let's zoom into the selected districts and villages to understand how these more macro-structural inequalities shape climate and migration interactions on the ground. It is important to highlight that these villages were chosen to reflect not a cross-section of society. In other words, it's not meant to be representative of everybody living in this region, but it's about showing the perspectives of those in the greatest needs, because World Vision works to support these people, the most vulnerable, those in the greatest need. If our efforts do not make their lives better, they are simply not good enough. When we move to Cambodia, so Phnom Penh district is a border district, Cambodia-Thai border, characterized by very high irregular migration rates, a legacy of the Khmer Rouge, poor infrastructure, and very notably high disability rates, the highest disability rates in the country. In the first village, you'll see these labeled like this for anonymity of the participants. Most are low-income farmers, reliant on microfinance, facing repeated crop failures and housing damage from frequent floods and droughts. Migration is very common here, with many moving to urban areas or crossing into Thailand. The second village shares a similar socioeconomic and environmental profile, but the debts here are even larger. We'll talk more about debt in a minute. The migration patterns are increasingly urban and domestic rather than cross-border. Many of these movements depend on previous networks. In both villages, not migrating is a sign of relative wealth, because wealthier landowners and farmers are, of course, better able to weather these challenges. As we move forward, however, we see that migration decisions are not only about economics. Married couples in Cambodia, we found, often migrate together if they have grandparents that can care for the children. If not, usually one parent migrates alone. These decisions are influenced by gender and caregiving roles and also a keen awareness of environmental risks. As a 56-year-old grandmother with 5 grandchildren under her care explained, if my husband goes to Thailand, I stay. If I go, my husband stays. We take turns. I am afraid that if we both go, my grandchildren will drown in the floodwaters. During a recent flood, one of her older grandchildren fell into the water, narrowly escaping a very serious accident. In Sakuma district, in Champasak province in Laos, environmental factors and migration dynamics play out different ways because, of course, this is all shaped by very unequal geographical locations and socioeconomic and vulnerability profiles. The district, however, doesn't have a lot of resilience in place. The district lies on a rural floodplain near the Thai-Lao border. This region faces significant challenges with limited access to roads and services and high vulnerability to climate shocks. In the first village, most residents belong to the Swai ethnic minority and are engaged in subsistence farming. The village is highly flood-prone due to its location next to a river. During heavy rains, the river becomes unsafe and people are isolated. Many people head to Bangkok and other areas of Thailand for work. In the second village, while floods are less frequent, droughts are a major issue, severely impacting crop production and fish availability. The problem is also worsened by other environmental issues on the ground, such as deforestation. However, a key difference between the two villages is the accessibility of education. Here, there are primary schools and secondary schools nearby. So unlike in the first village, children do not have to travel across the river for their education. However, those most vulnerable face floods, isolation, and limited infrastructure. For example, Noi, who is a 35-year-old from the Swai ethnic minority, living in the first village with her husband, 5 children, and elderly parents. Floods often devastate their rice crops and isolate the community, cutting off access to schools, drinking water, and supplies. In other words, to basic necessities. As she explained, after a recent flood, children couldn't go to school. There was no drinking water and rice crops were ruined. Many people were scared, and some were stuck in the village, unable to call for help. Noi hopes for better infrastructure. We aspire to have a bridge. If we get a bridge and improve roads, life will be better. We also need food, as there are days when we simply don't have enough. Shifting to Vietnam, the challenges in Tong Xuan highlight how geography and environmental risk compounded by hydropower infrastructure further shape environmental damages and migration decisions. The district is mountainous, remote, with very high poverty rates, frequent floods and landslides. It also faces risks related to hydropower discharge. In the first village, about 30% of households belong to the Thai ethnic minority, with the rest mainly kin. They primarily engage in agriculture, like all the other villages. And again, here, the village lies next to a river. And when the water levels rise, not only due to heavy rains, but also due to dam discharges, crossing is dangerous. Flooding has decreased farm outputs and brought people into debt. As a result, many have become long-term internal migrants. Because of course, in Vietnam, what we're seeing, these marginalized communities, they're not crossing into Laos, which is worse off. They're staying within Vietnam. In the second village, people are generally better off, with more access to a farm job opportunities, such as factory work. This village is more urbanized, standing out in this rural region. Although less dependent on natural resources, they also face significant environmental challenges. However, migration patterns here are more diverse than in the other villages because there's expanded industrial zones offering more job opportunities. This has resulted in more one-parent migration, with men often migrating farther, while women tend to commute daily and remain at home to care for the family. However, for those living just across the river, it's really a very short ride away. Life is quite different. As a woman explained, when the dams discharge water, we are quarantined. Children are not allowed to go to school. It's an isolated village. Children can miss school for very long periods. If you have relatives on the other side of the river, you won't miss school during the rainy season. But if you don't, you have to miss school. The contrast between those separated by a simple river highlights how geography alone can shape a child's future. But isolation is only one of many challenges. Now let's explore, and of course we've already started exploring, why is it that parents in these villages migrate, and what are the impacts this has on the children remaining behind? So, of course, economic struggles are the main thing. Poverty is the main driver of distress migration, not only here, all over the world. What climate change does is it worsens these economic struggles through diverse pathways. And of course, parents hope to have higher wages and therefore try to find locations where this may be possible. Crop failures, unstable jobs locally, and debt, often linked to floods and storms, drive distress migration. Parents, of course, migrate to secure a better future for their children, or at least they do so in the hope that there will be benefit for those children. There's a lack of land, arable land, sometimes tenure issues, sometimes the consequence of devastating floods, and forced sales of land that drive parents to migrate to pay off debts. Another issue is mechanization. It's reducing rural job opportunities. It's increasing and making life easier for many farmers, but it also has a downside. There's less employment. In our villages in Cambodia and Lao PDR, both parents often migrate. In Vietnam, typically only one parent goes. And here is a quote that exemplifies the issues around debt. So as a 32-year-old woman from Cambodia said, people migrate because they don't have land for farming. They used to own land, but they were in debt due to floods and droughts. So they sold their land to repay the debt. Sometimes they borrowed money for farming. They couldn't harvest their crops, so they lost them and didn't have money to repay the debt. As parents embark on migration journeys to provide for their families, the decision is rarely straightforward. The path they choose, whether internal or cross-border, brings a new set of challenges, particularly when migration involves dangerous, irregular routes or the harsh realities of exploitative labor conditions. In Thailand, the promise of higher wages attracts many migrants from Cambodia and Lao PDR, but the reality is more complicated. Regular migrations comes with restrictions that often prevent parents from bringing their children, forcing them to choose between a dangerous irregular journey or leaving their children behind. Those who migrate irregularly face exploitation and dangerous conditions. Those who migrate regularly often do too, and therefore are often unable to return home. Internal migrants, especially in Vietnam and Cambodia, fare slightly better, but still face issues like wage theft and limited access to services like healthcare. Across all countries, migrant workers find employment in sectors like agriculture, construction, and domestic work, but protections in these sectors are minimum, leaving them very vulnerable. These harsh realities of distress migration play out in countless lives, and behind every statistic is a personal story of sacrifice and hardship. For example, we were speaking with a 35-year-old mother from Laos of three who migrated to Bangkok, leaving these three children behind to work in construction. She did so hoping to earn money for her mother's brain tumor treatment. However, when she arrived, she was confined to the premises, an aspect of forced labor, and witnessed violence. I was scared, and I had to return to my room. Despite her regular migrant status, she was underpaid. They didn't pay me on time, and even when they did, it was only a partial amount. And they provided limited funds for our basic needs. Tragically, she never saw her mother again before she passed away. As parents struggle abroad, The children remaining behind also face their own set of challenges, often without little support. For example, the wish is often to send money of migration. And remittances from parents are lower than expected and often inconsistent. Elder caregivers, especially grandmothers, struggle to provide adequate support because they have work demands, disability, health problems, illiteracy, often leading to food insecurity. Elder siblings, particularly girls, take on significant household and caregiving responsibilities. And many children have to drop out of school as families need additional hands on the farm and/or extra wages, affecting their education. The absence of parents leads to emotional distress. So, for example, Tida, a 12-year-old girl from Cambodia, lives with her two younger brothers. Their grandmother used to live with them, but she left to work also, and the children now live alone in her small house. She cooks, does housework, and grows some chilies to sell. Her parents migrated to Thailand because there's no work, due in part to the floods and droughts that were devastating their village, and they were in debt to a microfinance provider because they borrowed money for food. Now they only come home for the holidays. I don't want them to go, but what can we do when we don't have money? She worries that their work is arduous and they might get sick or injured. She often cries by herself at night. These devastating stories also resound in the faces of children that have never even met their parents. For example, this girl from Lao PDR explains, I have never seen their faces since I was born. I don't know where they live in Thailand. I feel sad because I want my parents to take me on a trip as my friends. Life would be much better if my parents had stayed. I would be able to go to school and not have to work out, not have to go out to work to earn money. Instead, she lived with her 16-year-old sister and brother-in-law. She had to drop out of school after the 3rd grade and went foraging in the nearby forest to earn money. Children, of course, migrate in the context of these very difficult situations for very similar reasons to their parents. They migrate to help pay off household debts, cover their siblings' school fees, to manage the medical expenses of their grandparents, or generally try to improve their family situation. Social norms and family expectations push children, especially from poor families, to contribute to household income by migrating for work, often at the expense of their education. Due to limited legal pathways, many children migrate through irregular and often risky channels. As a 13-year-old girl from Cambodia, who is now living with her grandparents and 3 younger siblings, she migrated to Phnom Penh when she was only 10, along with her mother and siblings, and they all were talking 10 years old. My family is poor and is short of so many things. There was flooding as well. My grandpa and my grandma are also sick. So my mom decided to take me to work so that we can have money to support the family. Most children migrated with one or both of their parents. However, some did travel alone. In Thailand, migrant children can attend public schools, but many fear revealing their status, and schools struggle to support non-Thai speakers. In addition, many of the children that migrate with their parents are of a higher age. They are expected to work alongside their parents. Child migrants endured long hours, exploitation, and wage theft in plantations, constructions, factories, and domestic work. While some did meet their goals, many returned home determined to never migrate again. And this is a story that I'm going to close my segment with. It's a child migrant working to support his family, the story of Soporn. At 12, Soporn and his father migrated to Phnom Penh to earn money after a storm destroyed their homes and left them in debt. They first moved to the first village where we had gone and grew potatoes, but it wasn't enough to cover their loans. We were so poor, we didn't have enough money to buy food and repay our debt. Just to give you an idea, we're talking about people that have debts to an extent of more than $200 a month, sometimes a lot more, when they can barely earn $30 or $40 a month. How can you possibly pay off those debts? They worked as painters, but after being cheated twice, they returned home in frustration. His father decided not to move again, but Soporn tried again. He didn't have enough money to pay the bus, so he was dropped by the driver along the way. I was walking for 2 days and I was sleeping outside. Finally, a stranger took pity on him, took him in and found him work in a cushion factory. They started to force me to work overtime, but they didn't pay me extra just for my workday. Sometimes I worked until 11 or midnight. I needed to be down at work by 6:30 a.m. Soporn, then devastated by these long hours, moved on to construction and fruit picking near the Thai border. Remember, we're talking about a 12-year-old. He sends money home for debts every month, for food and for the medical expenses of his family. When we met him, he was back home for a visit, but he was telling us that he was planning to leave again soon. I do not want to go back, but because of my family's poor condition, I need to go back to work. He dreams of a better life for his family, hoping his siblings can finish school and his family will no longer be in misery. How will he make this happen? Just keep on trying, he says. Of course, these child migrants' aspirations are driven by economic distress. Many children said they had decided to migrate to help their families out of economic struggles and our debt, not necessarily to fulfill very large dreams. They found hardship that was beyond expectations. Migrant children had no grand illusions about migration, but they were not prepared for the levels of exploitation and deprivation that they faced. Aspirations and dreams are constrained by their harsh realities of every day. Some children who were able to pursue their educations did have big dreams, even to become doctors or physicians, but the majority were just hoping to meet their daily survival needs. And with this, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Claire Steiner, who will walk us through some of the recommendations of the report. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah, for that very comprehensive overview of our research study findings. I know it's quite a bleak picture that we've provided, but as we see, children and youth in Southeast Asia are facing mounting threats to their health, education, livelihood, and economic prospects in the context of migration and climate change. Climate change impacts are deepening pre-existing poverty, as Sarah mentioned, and inequality, making people more vulnerable to distressed migration and through it to exploitation and abuse. Migration fundamentally is not a negative thing. It can definitely be positive in opening up worldviews and allowing for economic transfers back to communities of origin. But what we see within these stories is that not enough is being done to enable safe transfer, safe protection during migration, and enabling people to have decisions over their mobility. As much as Southeast Asian countries have recognized the urgent need to build resilience to climate change, policymakers are only beginning to make visible the links between climate change and human immobility, with still a ways to go to integrate the concerns of children and youth, and in particular, the concerns of children and youth of different genders, ethnicities, abilities, and other social identities. This study thus ends with a call for action to concrete actions that will address key drivers of distressed migration and communities of origin, provide those remaining behind with tailored support to address growing challenges, make migration safer, more humane, and more just for both parents and children alike, and enable a more inclusive agenda at the intersections of child rights, climate change, and migration. So now I'll be going through just briefly our call to action, but more details can be found within the full report. So first, on enhancing community resilience through robust infrastructure and disaster preparedness. As Sarah mentioned, many of the participants echoed that if they just had a better infrastructure, if there was greater upgrading that would enable them to become more resilient to climate change, that they wouldn't be facing the same risks from these recurrent and compounding hazards. Thus, there's a need to develop climate resilient roads, bridges, and better wash facilities, so that way communities aren't facing the same hazards in the event of climate events. There's also a need to enhance preparedness. Rather than having climate change be an individual adaptation that's susceptible to existing inequalities, we need to be supporting whole of community approaches to planning and also anticipatory action that ensures that all people are able to contribute towards resilience without having individuals falling behind. There's also a need to improve social protection. both by expanding and strengthening systems that can then provide timely and also flexible support for families that are experiencing climate hazards. And lastly, there's a need to engage communities. Communities already know the risks that they're dealing with, and they can also develop solutions towards a lot of these problems. We need to be using participatory methods that help communities better identify and prioritize needs, as well as enable cross-sharing between communities within the same country. Next, as echoed also by Sarah, a lot of the people there were saying that they would much rather be able to stay in origin if they could, if they had support for livelihoods that were more climate resilient. So first, we call for the need to improving local livelihoods. This includes increasing agriculture support, making agricultural extension services much more adaptable to these growing risks, and creating diverse job opportunities that reflect the needs and the desires of the local communities, whether that be through agricultural support and training for things like animal husbandry and livestock, or whether that be for non-agricultural based livelihoods. Next, we need to ensure financial security. This includes providing crop insurance that is able to protect people in the event of drought or flooding, but also it's about financial literacy that integrates climate risk and informs communities about specific problems that they might be facing when they take out loans. Next, there's a need to promote resilience. This includes both supporting small enterprise development within communities, but also enabling stronger regulation of predatory lending. Debt definitely comes out as a very strong factor for distress migration within our study, and it's very important that we both facilitate community mechanisms for regulation and reporting, but also a stronger state-led regulation of such predatory behavior. Next, like I mentioned before, migration itself is not a negative. Rather, it's the fact that many of these communities are facing risks of exploitation and abuse from limited protections in origin. There needs to be stronger ways of facilitating safe family migration, particularly within bilateral agreements that allow for dependents to be brought, but also to be brought safely. So this means enhancing regular migration channels and also making regular migration more accessible. Again, a lot of these are already existing and persistent challenges to migration, but what we're seeing within our study is that climate change is exacerbating and creating new stress on these already existing challenges. So protecting migrants from abuse, this includes strengthening oversight to prevent exploitation. We know which industries that migrants tend to work within, and yet they're working within it because there's limited regulation, but there's also very limited access then to key services that help them access their rights. And there also needs to be a focus on safeguarding child migrants in particular. Within the study, we saw both children that are migrating as dependents, but also we saw a lot of solo child migrants, particularly those teenagers with limited access to child-centric services. There's a need to promote safe migration infrastructure. So this includes both, although access to education and healthcare might be available on paper, this does not necessarily mean that it is enforced and implemented throughout the country. And so there's a need to improve access to education, but also we see there's a need for psychological support. Many of these migrants are undergoing new challenges, maybe adapting without support networks in place. And it's our responsibility to try to provide services that are responsive to that. Next, there's a need to care for caregivers and also the children who stay with them. We already know these migration patterns that are existing within these communities. There's a lot of young adults that will continue to migrate, whether or not the climate challenges are met. And yet, still, there's challenges in tailoring programs to the specific needs of older caregivers and young mothers. We need to be more flexible and realize that caretaking is not just necessarily the mother and the father, but rather there's a very diverse set of caretaking and often community caretaking that takes place in the absence of the parents. And with this also, grandparents can be crucial for adaptation, especially climate adaptation. And yet the programs that we have in place are not necessarily responsive to their specific needs, nor are they trying to engage them as key agents of change. Next, in order to facilitate discussions to address changing caregiver roles and mitigate risk to children, we need to be promoting intergenerational dialogues. This helps to understand what specific responsibilities and duties are needed both within housekeeping and labor of specific gendered inequalities. Next, enhancing connectivity and support. So ensuring that families can stay connected. Although we're living in this digital age, we saw from several children that they're not even able to video call or conference like with their family. And because of that, they're not able to see their faces, which is very important for emotional support. So we need to be supporting that, as well as we see that many migrants are only able to return home during the holidays because of financial constraints. There's so much more that we could be doing to enable them to come back and visit their children more regularly. And then lastly, while the other objectives were speaking a little bit more to the need for more sustainable livelihoods for migration protections, I think it's also important to acknowledge that many of the children and youth within our study will never be able to participate in key processes that are enabling stronger climate change and migration policies. We need to be better at integrating climate change into curriculum at a young age from primary school and encourage the development of clubs for local climate action. There's a need also for including youth perspectives. So this could be through embedding child and youth concerns across all relevant ministries and agencies addressing climate change and migration, not just siloing it into specific ministries on women's affairs or children's affairs. There's a need also a good practice of having child and youth councils that are then able to have strategic policy influence in these processes. And we need to be mobilizing and enabling them to have that influence. Next, there's also significant participation barriers. While children and youth are leading the charge in climate change and bringing to light a lot of the issues affecting the next and future generations, many children, especially those with irregular migrant statuses, are having their concerns become invisible because of they're not even able to meet their basic needs. There needs to be more done to address structural obstacles to meaningful engagement with diverse children and youth. This also means legitimizing diverse forms of knowledge contribution to key agencies addressing these issues, such as through forms of creative expression, of drawings, of pictures that are able to encapsulate the pictures of what they're seeing within their communities, as well as enabling then their solution making. It's only by addressing such participation barriers that we can hope for more inclusive policy. Last, we just want to end with a few conclusions. Children and youth, as we've seen within the study, are facing a future that's shaped by injustice with worsening climate impacts. We see migration can offer a potential way for resilience and poverty reduction, but only if it's safe and free for exploitation. Those who remain behind also need stronger support and opportunities to thrive in their communities. They should have greater choice over their decisions to stay or their decisions to migrate safely. Thus, transformative changes are needed to reduce inequalities and enable migration to be empowering. We want to end this presentation with a final statement. These young people deserve a better future, but it is up to adults, especially those with resources and power, to start building that future. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Cất tàu của Tây Thái cất tàu vì vậy về lập buôn chặt tôi chật tăngពីខ្ញុំនៅ8ខែបាននៅជាឪពុកម្ដាយខ្ញុំមានអារម្មណ៍ថាតូចចិត្តមកវាស្នាពេលបាននៅជាឪពុកម្ដាយរឿងពិបាកដែរអ្នកគ្រូព្រោះយើងនៅខ្វះភាពកក់ក្ដៅពីគាត់បន្តិចទៀតខ្ញុំរៀនចប់ខ្ញុំប្រាប់ថាមិនចង់ខ្ញុំបន្តិចទៀតទៅបន្តិចទៀតខ្ញុំរៀនចប់នៅទីនេះគឺមានការចំណាក់ស្រុកអំពីអ្នកនៅទីនេះគឺមានការចំណាក់ស្រុកអំពីអ្នកម្ដាយនិងលោកឪពុកដែលទុកឲ្យកូនតូចៗនៅជាមួយនឹងលោកយាយលោកតាចាស់ចាស់ហើយនៅជុំតាហើយនៅជុំអ៊ំហើយនៅជុំមីងមិនសោះល្អដូចអតីតឪពុកម្ដាយមិនថ្នាក់ថ្នមមិនអូមអីលើឪពុកម្ដាយទេបើមានឪពុកម្ដាយនៅជិតយើងមានការផ្ដល់ភាពកក់ក្ដៅពីគាត់បានចិត្តដិតគាត់ជំរុញយើងច្រើនយើងចង់ធ្វើអីគាត់ជំរុញយើងរហូតហើយគាត់នៅជិតយើងទៀតដើម្បីជួយយាយខ្លះដើម្បីជាខ្លះហើយប៉ះពាល់ការសិក្សានៅពេលដែលយើងបានជ្រើសរើសគម្រោង GMIA ក្នុងការអនុវត្តជាមួយនឹងក្រុមជីដូនដោយសារយើងបានមើលឃើញបញ្ហា
ដែលធ្វើឲ្យយើងបានគិតគូរអំពីអាណាព្យាបាលរបស់កុមារដើម្បីយើងផ្ដល់ចំណេះដឹងឲ្យគាត់ពីរបៀបនៃការថែទាំនិងការចិញ្ចឹមកូននិងចិញ្ចឹមចៅឲ្យបានល្អដើម្បីជៀសផុតអំពីជំងឺកង្វះអាហារូបត្ថម្ភ
យាយគាត់បានទស្សនកម្មភាពដែលពីអង្គការទស្សនពិភពលោករៀនបញ្ញាបានជីដូនគាត់រៀនខាងយាយចិញ្ចឹមចៅអាយុក្រោម5ឆ្នាំនៅពេលដែលយើងបានជ្រើសរើសគម្រោង GMIA ក្នុងការអនុវត្តជាមួយនឹងក្រុមជីដូនហើយមួយទៀតយើងមានសកម្មភាពដែលយើងធ្វើការសមាហរណកម្មផែនការជាមួយគ្នាដែលយើងធ្វើការជាមួយមណ្ឌលសុខភាពតាមរយៈនឹងកន្លងមកយើងឃើញថាមានការផ្លាស់ប្ដូរច្រើនការមកកាន់ការយល់ដឹងរបស់គាត់ក៏បានច្រើនដែរទៅនេះជាម្ដាយផងជាឪពុកផងបើនេះខ្លះយើងអាចជួយគាត់បានយើងជួយតែបើរបស់ខ្លះយើងអាចជួយគាត់បានទេយើងមានតែឈប់ទី1យើងគិតថាអ្វីដែលយើងមិនទុកគាត់ចោលទេចុះសួរសុខទុក្ខតាមផ្ទះជាពិសេសជាមួយនឹងក្រុមគ្រួសារដែលគាត់មានចៅកង្វះអាហារូបត្ថម្ភស្រួចស្រាលនិងធ្ងន់ធ្ងរហើយក្នុងនោះយើងមានក្រុមអន្តរជំនាន់គឺយើងបានបង្រៀនបន្ថែមទៀតជាសមាជិកក្រុមជាបុរសឬក៏សាច់ញាតិរបស់កុមារហ្នឹងហើយជាអាចនឹងខ្ញុំរៀនចប់ខ្ញុំទាំងធ្វើការខ្ញុំអាចនឹងជួយគ្រួសារខ្ញុំបានខ្លះហើយខ្ញុំអាចរកលុយឲ្យពួកខ្ញុំរៀនតាមក្រោយទៀតខ្ញុំចង់ឲ្យពុកម្ដាយឬក៏អ៊ំពូមីងទាំងអស់ដែលឃ្លាតពីកូនទៅនៅធ្វើការចំណាក់ស្រោចចង់ឲ្យគាត់មកនៅជាមួយកូនវិញ
migration here in the Asia region. So I'd like to invite our panelists to come up to the stage momentarily, but let me introduce them to you. First, you already know him, our youth representative from Laos, Si Savan. He is a dedicated change maker, an active member of World Vision East Asia's Young Minds Camp Advisory Council, focusing on child-led action, mobilization, and partnership, where he's been passionately driving child-led research on climate change with his counterparts across the region. So Si, you can please take to the stage. Mr. Wanchai Rujanavong is Thailand's representative to the ACWC and ASEAN. He is leading the implementation of the Regional Plan of Action for Children in the context of migration. His previous professional experience has included serving as a senior consultant prosecutor in the Office of the Attorney General to the Kingdom of Thailand and the Director General for International Affairs Departments. He's a passionate advocate for child protection, counter-trafficking, ending violence against children, and promoting children's rights in the context of migration. We will also be joined by Venera Urbeva, Program Specialist for Migration from UNICEF East Asia and the Pacific Regional Office. Venera is a Regional Program Specialist for Migration, and she has been with UNICEF for 10 years of experience working in child protection, supporting vulnerable children and adolescents in Asia and Eastern Europe. Venera has a graduate degree in human rights and public health with a focus on children and families. And we will be joined by Pepi Sadiq, Senior Regional Migrant Protection Specialist with the International Organization for Migration. Pepi has been in Bangkok with IOM's regional office for the past 4 years, prior to which she was working with IOM in Bangladesh. She is involved comprehensively across the portfolio of IOM's work in the region, including labor mobility, humanitarian coordination, and migrant protection. And prior to her work with IOM, she was also a journalist. And finally, we have Harley Hamilton, who is the Migration Program Director for the World Vision Foundation in Thailand. Harley oversees the migration program portfolio at World Vision Thailand, based in Bangkok. He has experience managing a range of programs, including public health and disease control, counter-trafficking in persons, labor rights, and child and youth participation. Harley has a master's degree in international development focused on child and youth participation. And we will have two moderators for the panel, Sarah, Dr. Sarah Vigil, who you've already met. And I'd also like to welcome to the stage Janice Ginting, who is the country director for World Vision in Cambodia. Welcome, Janice.
All right. Good morning, panels. Sawadee Krap. It's an honor for me to co-facilitate this session with Sarah. We would like to give you a chance to share one of two things that you think what most stood out for you from the research, and we probably have a follow-up questions. But let me start from myself around what I reflected from the research. Being worked in Cambodia for 2 years and seeing a first-hand experience what happened, I thought that the research really able to bring a rich illustrations of the real life experience of people, especially children, on how these interconnections between climate change and migration quite strongly. So I found that quite profound. So it really helps to land the macro statistics, all what we're talking about in the real life experience. That's number one. As much as I'm depressed and sad to see reality, but I also see a sense of hope. There are solutions on this. It may not be business as usual, as alluded by Neil and Dan this morning and Lindsay. So I'm asking myself, and I hope we can take reflections, what we can do better to help these children, to give them better opportunities, and to better protect them to address the unsafe migration. So panel, I'll start with Sid. If you can share with us what most stood out for you from the research, please share with us. Thank you.
I'm C, yes, I'm C, season one. In my view, the most stand out for me is impact of climate change that impact to youth, children, and the farmer. Because some children, they have to leave their school and have dropped out, and youth also, they have to go to work. Someone is didn't due to study because the financial and the how to say the finance from families does not provide enough, and that it's difficult to support them, and you would have to use to do the job, and they didn't to study. And from the farmer is they have to change their job to go far away from home, far away from family, and it's make like impact to the children that from that family far from their mother, their parent, they go far away from home, and it's very, very bad, I think. And through that, I do the child research. I know many things about the way they don't, and during the time that I go to conduct data collection, I know that the issue that they face and the thing that they need and what thing and they should have. And all of it is inspiring me to do the child research, and I hope that I will do more to engage this and how to say and share this to another peer, and gather with my peer to create more activity through our volunteer group. Like SEED, we create activity to raise awareness about the environment issue and disaster to public and student. Yes, to make them understand this. Yes, yes, my.
Thank you, C. His Excellency, may I ask you to share your thoughts? Thank you.
Good morning. I think that the most serious reason that we have all these children affected by migration is because of climate change disrupted their life. This climate change create a lot of very severe climate disaster like flood, drought, and severe storm and typhoon. So when it destroys the crops, they have to go to debt. And they cannot go to the bank or whatsoever to get a reasonable debt. But they have to go to, I don't know, you use the word microfinance or what you call predating lending, and I prefer to call them loan shark, because they charge approximately 240% of interest, or up to 1,000% per year. So once you fell in the vulnerable people fell into this loan shark, it is very difficult to pay off the debt. That's why they have to leave, to work elsewhere in order to try to gain money to pay back, or even sell the land. Why they fall into loan shark? Because they cannot get to any institutional lending that will charge them reasonable interest. So they have to go to this illegal lender because they need money immediately or urgent. That's why I prefer to call them their forced migration. What I mean is forced migration is no one forced them, but this natural disaster situation forced them to go to work, to migrate to work elsewhere in order to earn money. Then again, the system is not supporting. To go legally is very expensive, time-consuming, and very complicated. For example, Thai and Laos have MOU on for legal migration. But think that if you live outside of Vientiane, you have to travel to Vientiane in order to get the passport. And getting the passport is time-consuming and very complicated and costly. And after that, you have to travel into Thailand, and the arrangement for the work, you will be charged the fee by the Lao and Thai side. So the only option is go illegally into Thailand first. So that's why when they have to migrate, they are vulnerable, they're illegal, and then they end up with might be exploited. Luckily in Thailand that we have a policy to allow all the illegal migrants to register into a legal migrant for 2 years with visas and work permit and healthcare. And I think for around $200 per 2 years and renewable. So we have, I think, approximately 2 million illegal migrants turned to be legal migrant. But still, there are many that cannot afford that $200. So we still have, I think, about more than 1 million illegal migrants working. Another thing is that we have a very strong policy to allow that our children, no matter of what status, to enter school for free until grade 12, so that they can have education in Thailand, no matter of their status, legal or illegal. The Ministry of Interior will register their name as a non-Thai children, but they will accept it to school. And healthcare is also provided, but quite limited. So this is the things that we have to, one thing, I think in this study, you should further study how the system of loan shark affected their life. And then advise the government in all countries how to deal with this loan shark, how to reduce it. We have the system, but still there are many poor people are still affected by loan shark. And how to create the more easier legal way to migrate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wanchai. So from C, we heard that he felt that it's really sad that children left behind, and also talking about, school dropouts and Mr. Wanchai, keen to see more how this loan shark or micro loan really exacerbating, no matter the recipient country may have effect. So can we hear from Vinira and Pepe? What stood out most for you? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning. It's really wonderful to see you all this morning. I would like, first of all, to congratulate with the launch of this report. I think this is fantastic. It fills the gap in data and knowledge in understanding the situation of children, the most vulnerable who are affected by, migration and climate change. So this is really fantastic. And I think it's also, I'd like to comment that there's been so many perspectives and voices from children, and seeing participation of C. I'm just really, glad and happy to see you as well here. So I'd like to, say big thanks for that. And I'd like to just, first of all, circle back to mentioning that children are in the center of all of this. Children are rights holders, and they are, entitled to those rights now and today. They cannot wait. And it's also just to remind us that, this important principle of best interests of the child really guiding all our work, and why this is so important and key. Reflecting on the findings of the report, I'd like to mention that we have heard different stories. We have heard, and we can see that children are not a homogeneous group. There's so many different perspectives. We also see that they're experiencing a multidimensional impact of climate change, so and different fronts. And we also see that there are compounding deprivations and vulnerability that has an intergenerational impact. So we were able to see, in Cambodia, the impact of family separation, and the girl that was sharing her story with tears in her eyes just signifies the emotional toll that this takes, And we can also see, the impact of poverty, the high levels of disability. This is not by chance. All of these things are compounding, increasing their, vulnerability, and why there's the risk is much higher. We can also see the protective element of education, for example, from the story in Laos. Keeping children in schools can really be a protective element. We can see that, exclusion of ethnic minorities from social services is another element. And just to, mention another element from Vietnam, the geographical terrain. So the mountainous regions being more prone to, environmental shocks affecting livelihoods. So all these things really require anticipatory action, early preparedness, and concerted effort to tackle these issues at multiple levels. And so as we discuss, so the greater the vulnerability of these children, the greater is the risk, the climate risk of this for these children. And as we discuss the impact of climate change today, I just want to draw your attention to, and I want to make links with child development. We know that children and adolescents are going through rapid child development. This is physical, cognitive, social, and emotional. And, the toxic stress and all these deprivations that they experience can leave a lasting impact on their health and well-being. As they become adults, this impacts their, physical health, emotional health. We also know that 40% of mental health conditions in adults find their onset in adolescence. So this just signifies the importance and the urgency of the work that we have ahead of us. So just once again, congratulations, and I will reflect more later.
Thank you, Vinira. Pepe?
Thank you. And I think we work too much with each other, with Khun Wanachai and UNICEF, because our reflections and findings are quite similar. But I tried to think of things that haven't been said yet. But first, I wanted to start with just this lands very well with everything that IOM does, right? I mean, IOM has a global framework for climate change and migration, or climate change and mobility, that really kind of touches. And then I think this research adds to our understanding in all of the areas that we're looking at. So the way that we have framed it is that we need to think of solutions for people to stay, we need to think of solutions for people to move, and we need to think of solutions for people on the move, right? And I could see in your recommendations, there were plenty of those recommendations for all of it, whether it's local infrastructure or access to education to stay, or whether it is the same things and access to social protections once you've migrated. So I think it dovetails very, very nicely, just broadly speaking. But then also keeping in mind that the Mekong Basin is globally one of the most active migration pathways or corridors that we have, right? Migration here is intergenerational. It's been present forever. It's a coping mechanism, but not only, it's also sort of a mechanism for cultural, economic exchange that's been ongoing for a very long time. And reflecting also that as part of that, there are no regulated ways for children to be on the move, right? And this was touched upon by Kun Wanachai as well, that while it is fine to be mobile and migrate for economic reasons for grown-ups, there is absolutely nothing yet that governs the safe and regular migration of children. And I think that's really, and maybe this research allows us to build that broader macro level evidence base for the government counterparts to say that, you know, whether you've regulated this or not, it's a reality, it's happening. And surely it would be better if it was regulated, that we had ways for children to do this in a way that's safe and regular and that allows them to access services. Then having said that, actually, the ASEAN, with really Kun Wanachai's leadership, has this really exciting declaration on access or the rights of the child in the context of migration and the regional plan of action that comes with it, that I think really, if it was implemented as it is written, would already respond to a lot of the challenges and a lot of the areas that were highlighted here as where we need to put our efforts to. Then just maybe a few things that really jumped up for me as well. So one of them was the role of debt. I think that's very interesting, and we're not talking enough about the role of debt in terms of driving unsafe, vulnerable migration and what needs to be done about it, whether that's further regulation or even just looking into these different debt instruments, whether it is microfinance or other ways of lending, because it's increasingly coming up in all of the research that we're seeing, I think, and we don't really have a lot of answers to it yet collectively, I think, as practitioners. And then the other one was access to justice. And I guess, again, for children in particular, because they are almost always in irregular situations, access to justice is a huge challenge where it's very hard to support that. And then finally, just one area that I would like to see more research in is the role of the private sector in all of this, because we've certainly seen that as a promising space in sector doing human rights-based due diligence in the labor supply chains, and maybe now starting to look at some of those border communities where we know that a lot of children are on the move as well, in terms of what's maybe their role and responsibility in providing certain services, whether that's education or other things. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Pepe. Hailey?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So great to be here. Thank you. I think first reflection for me is just really think it's a great piece of research, and not self-congratulating myself because I wasn't really involved, but Sarah, Claire and the team. I just think the richness of the data and really bringing children's stories to life it really humanizes a lot of the technical conversations that we often have. So thank you, like really great work. I think from a destination country point of view, like here in Thailand, I think sort of two big reflections from me. I think the first one is when we're working on migration programs or working with migrants in destination, often what we're doing is trying to improve the quality of life of migrants in destination. And I think that's really important, working on things like access to service delivery, those kind of things, regularization. But I think what I've really thought about today, having heard the findings, is that it's really important that we link that work on both sides of the border, so on both origin and in destination, because if we're only addressing people's needs in destination, all of the people that are left behind in origin, like the stories that we've heard this morning, we're not addressing those. And often that's the reason why people are choosing to migrate, like again we've heard today, is to support communities and families back at home. And so I think often we're doing country-based programs, but really thinking about, for me personally, you know, going away and thinking about how can we actually really address vulnerability on both sides of the border, you know, in both origin and in destination, I think is really important. So yeah, thanks for that. I think the other point, and building on Pepe's last point, I think also reflecting around what a just transition looks like. So we heard a lot today around how climate change is impacting vulnerability factors that are leading people to migrate more often. But thinking again from a destination perspective, climate change also has significant impacts on migrant livelihoods in destination, especially in a place like Thailand, where migrants are employed in agriculture and fisheries, where we see the impacts of climate change on those sectors and those sectors contributing significantly to climate change as well. And so I think that nexus or interconnectedness between labor mobility, labor migration, decent work, and climate change, not just as a driver for migration, but also in destination is really, really important as well. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, panel. Maybe if I can have one or two follow-up questions. Pepe and Dr. Wanchai, you've been working on some maybe regional level of initiative or cross-country program. Is there anything specific that you can take from this research that, that can be helpful for you in what you're doing now in promoting safe migrations? And also, Finira, are you really focusing on protection children, for example? Is there anything you can share about how maybe UNICEF can share some thoughts about, better protection for children in country or destinations? Mr. Wanchai.
Yes, in part of ASEAN, we work very much with UNICEF, IOM, and all others organizations, of which I would like to invite World Vision to work with us too. I lead ASEAN to have the declaration to protect the right of children in the context of migration in 2019. And in 2021, we finished a very comprehensive and inclusive regional plan of action to protect children, the right of children in the context of migration. This is a very comprehensive plan that includes everything. So I have several projects now, one with IOM on the alternative to detention. Because Thailand have a very now it's permanent policy now that we will not put children in the cell. But once if they are illegal migration and then have to be sent back, we will put them in a shelter together with their parents. Now the immigration department had built quite a big shelters within its compound in order to for children only. And now I work with IOM to create an ASEAN project to bring this good practice to introduce it to all another 10 members, because next year we will have Timor-Leste. So it will be 11 countries now. This project will have we will produce a guideline of good practices and trying to encourage the other 10 countries to do that. And also AISHA, the ASEAN International Committee on Human Rights, is now drafting a declaration on the environmental rights of ASEAN. That will include all the vulnerable groups as well, not only adults, but children, women, and the disabled, who are the most vulnerable, right? So in Thailand, again, I would like to emphasize that we have the labor protection law that does distinguish whether you are legal or illegal. We protect everyone equally. But the problem is illegal migrants don't understand it, and they're afraid to make complaint. Once they were not paid the legal rate, or they are wage theft, or they are not paid fully, they are entitled to complain to the labor department, and they will take action, or even the labor court in Thailand. but they're afraid of their illegal status. So one thing that we try to do is to trying to encourage them to register as a legal labor with work permit, with legal visa, and with benefit of healthcare. It is quite inexpensive because the healthcare for 2 years is around 4,000 baht or 130 US dollars for 2 years. But for Thai people, the government paid $300 for every Thai. So it is the price that we try. And forced labor, or if they deceived it, if they cheated in labors, it may be the offense of human trafficking or labor trafficking, which is carry a very 15 years penalty. Moreover, we prevented child labor by changing the labor law so that if an employer employ a child under 18 to work illegally, the employer will be fined 400,000 baht or 12,000 US dollar per one child. If you have 2 child, it's twofold. If you have 10 child, it's tenfold fine. So this is very high price, and we cut the benefit of having cheap labor. If you are caught and you are fined, it's not worth hiring children. So now the problem of child labor is very much reduced in Thailand. So I would like to invite World Vision to work with me. If you want to do any project with ASEAN, you can look at the regional plan of action and pick out what dimension you want to work. And then we can draft a project together and then make it into ASEAN project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Invitation accepted, right, Lindsay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all these really, really interesting and powerful insights. Perhaps just to follow up a little bit, because we've already heard from you, from Pepi, for example, the issues of debt as being issues that we need more work on, more research on, and it really is quite devastating, this kind of invisible predatory sharks that are making people's lives worse. Of course, what is happening at destination is also very important. And we've heard from Mr. Wonchai the great progress also that Thailand and ASEAN is trying to make. And of course, I do wonder, there's always a middle ground, which is very difficult in these cases, because of course we want to avoid child labor and we want to criminalize child labor. But a lot of these children that we see, that is really their only way of helping their families to survive. It is only their only way of helping themselves feed themselves, right? So I wonder, to what extent do we need to accompany this of deeper kind of root vulnerability causes? And also the extent, Thailand, for example, everybody has access to education and to healthcare, independent of their status, which is great on paper. However, what we've seen a lot as well is that a lot of these very poor marginalized communities, one, they might not know that these policies even exist. And two, even when these policies exist, they still fear that somehow by registering their children to school or going to a hospital, they're going to get in trouble because they don't have papers, right? So this irregular migration, which we try to call it irregular to avoid the kind of criminalizing language of illegality, although of course it's a nuance, but words sometimes matter. I wonder, to what extent at destination could World Vision also empower these people, World Vision, IOM, UNICEF, all of you who have a very powerful voice in the agenda setting. One thing is for policies to exist. Another very different thing is for those people to actually dare use these policies, especially when they are irregular. So just
Thank you, Sarah. Vinir, do you want to take up that?
Yeah. So I'd like to just comment and maybe mention the leadership of ACWC and ASEAN bodies in actually implementing the ASEAN Declaration on the Rights of Children in the context of migration, especially with Khun Wanchai taking the leadership role in developing a regional plan of action, which I think is really then an important step in making sure that these documents on paper become a reality in children's lives. In this vein, I would like to mention that UNICEF will be supporting midterm review of this regional plan of action, culminating in a report sometime next year in the second half of the year, just really reviewing, what has been done, what are still the gaps in addressing the situation of children affected by migration. And so when we talk about creating an environment fit for children, I'd like to mention that it's important to remember about, the systems level work, right? So really creating and strengthening child protection systems that are resilient to climate shocks. It's also important to ensure that these child protection systems are inclusive, to migrant children and refugees. It's important to also remember that we're talking about different actors that provide services to children. So here, mentioning about the role of social service workforce and really making sure that they have the capacity to provide these services and really ensure, be part of the work on climate adaptation and climate mitigation work. And of course, ensuring that educators and health specialists are also equipped with their relevant required skills and knowledge to provide these services. And of course, the very important aspect, which was highlighted by the report that was presented today, is the role of children and parents, families and caregivers. And here I'd like to mention that there is a really important aspect and space for children to be equipped with climate education, with green skills, to really know, how they can adapt and prepare themselves to the effects of climate change, because this is not a conversation whether it's going to happen or not. This is going to happen, it is happening. And so how do we make sure that children are included and have a meaningful, platform to participate at all levels? And what I loved about the report that was presented today was really signifying the role of families and parents, because, when we think about children and creating a protective environment, the first layer of protection is, of course, their parents, right? Their caregivers. And so here, one of the key recommendations is really to make sure that, the childcare systems are in place. So, this includes formal kinship arrangements, if children are left behind by their parents, who are the caregivers, and maybe even to formalize this process, when parents migrate, they, assign a guardian who will be responsible for their children. So these processes are quite important. And it's really, I think, important to also to attract the attention to the fact that there is enough research that shows that, increasing access of children to social services, to health and education can play a critical role. It can be a very protective element in reducing the risks and, environmental shocks that children face. And just the final statement from my side is to just circle back that what you were mentioning a bit earlier, that apart from working on creating systems at the national level, it's so important to foster regional partnership. And so here, I think ACWC and ASEAN bodies are doing really remarkable job in really ensuring, this collaboration across different countries, and here applying route-based approach, not just working in the destination countries, but also working, what are the, source or origin countries, what is the situation, and actually addressing the multiple drivers of migration and, climate change induced migration. So I think those are the key important aspects. And here, I think even just as an example, how can we enhance cross-border case management collaboration between different service providers to ensure that, we're following these children, vulnerable children, and that these children can have access to services wherever they are. Yeah.
I'll be quick. Just that regional plan of action is a wonderful document. So please, World Vision and everyone here in the room, do take a look at it. All of the 10 ASEAN member states have made very concrete commitments to specific services that they will be providing to children in the context of migration. And I think it'll be great that we can support that as well as participate in the review and see where it's at. IOM did a piece of research last year where we were looking at the existing barriers that are still there to stop children from accessing some of those services that are considered now in the convention as a right, including access to legal identity, so really birth certification, access to education, and access to social protections. And we are now, as part of that kind of recommendations from that study, doing some very specific work actually together with UNICEF and ACWC on supporting some of that. So looking at, for example, supporting birth registration in Thailand for migrant children. So really specifically kind of looking at, why can't you get registered, or why aren't your parents aware that you can get registered? Because everything starts from legal identity. Once you have birth registration, then you can get access to education, then you can start getting access to healthcare and all the rest of it. And then just also keeping in mind that migration in this region in particular is very rarely permanent. It's often circular in nature. And so most of these families or the parents will be returning back to their countries of origin. And I think that's where we really need to think about, what does return and reintegration look like? And also, what's the government's role in supporting reintegration? Because that, for example, would bring us more closely into that debt question. When people come back with high levels of debt, and when it's been due to kind of lax regulatory frameworks and predatory lending, how can the government be involved in starting to look at debt restructuring in terms of looking at other financial instruments that are there for those migrants? And I think that would also then allow us to kind of really bring that up to surface so that everyone understands it. I think I can leave it there.
Thank you. Before I hand over to Lindsay, maybe to facilitate Q&A with the participants here or those virtually, I will give you a second, ma'am. Can I ask also C and Mr. Wonchai or Helly, we have 30 seconds, anything else you'd like to respond to Sarah questions that's been alluded by the other panel? So do you have anything to share? Is there anything else you'd like to share in addressing, I think Sarah asking about the loan shark issues in country? You don't have to, but if there's anything before we take the question from the panel, which I'm sure they have more question as well. Mr. Wonchai, very briefly, thank you.
There's a question on the policy of education, how they can access to this. This is a permanent policy of Thailand implemented for more than a decade. And we advertises in the, especially if you go to the Stockholm or somewhere that they have a quite big Myanmar communities, of workers in Thailand. We have poster, we have an announcement in Myanmar's language, and and they spread the news across the country to all, because every legal workers, immigrant workers in Thailand have cell phone. They send all, and they don't believe the government, they believe their own peer. So when we spread all this news through that community to the leaders, it's spread, and everyone know that. And we that they can go to school, even though they have illegal status, their children can go to school. And the government not only provide free education, they have support, like for free lunch for all children, not only my grandchildren, for all children in school, free lunch. And then every year they have a sum of money to support for dresses and books and all that. Not only for migrants, to every children. So that is the Thai government. So I believe that every communities of migrants, they know this. Not only Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia as well. I think that the most important things is that we have to deal with the loan shark or the predatory lending, because this is a very serious, not only because the failed crop and a sickness or whatsoever, they need immediate money to use, and then they will fall into the trap that they could not come out. In Thailand, we're trying to have a several system. We even have the law to punish loan shark, but still we cannot solve the problem. But if you don't have this kind of thing to intervene, it will be worse, you know. However, how can we improve the access to all this kind of service legally? For example, if they can have an access to the labor protection scheme, you know, they have to the minimum income, you know, legal minimum income that they can get the minimum income that will be enough so that the children do not have to help working. And we do not allow under 15 to work. That is absolute. But from over 15 to 18, we allow them to work in not a dangerous, you know, kind of work, but you have to report to the Minister of Labor so that they can inspect what kind of labor, not to work at night, not to work in entertainment places, not to work in a dangerous work kind of work. That kind of work.
ขอบคุณครับ Mr. Wanchai.
Just one more.
Yes, please, sir.
You know, so I would like to invite World Vision to have a meeting with me, and then we look at the regional plan of action in the context of migration, and then see what we can work together.
Thank you. Helen, mindful of time, let's take question from the panel. And I also like to invite Claire here to take the question if that's related to research. Thank you. Over to you.
Great. So I hope you've all enjoyed hearing from the panelists. I think we have a really diverse, really experienced panel. And so it's been very interesting listening to your various perspectives. If there are questions that you would like to pose to either the panel or the research team, this is now the time. So we'll take this first hand over here. I saw.
Good morning, everyone. So I am Dr. Dikana Kaiser. I'm from USAID. So I am actually based in Asia, and I'm responsible for the portfolio of CTIP counter human trafficking. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for this very compelling and comprehensive report research launch. There is certainly strong connection between science, human reality, powerful communication and partnership. So having academic background myself, I really appreciate this. And I see that this is there's a really huge team effort behind this research launch. So going into the question, and I believe this is predominantly the question for World Vision. However, if other panelists see it's relevant to answer this question, please feel free to come in. So the question is, what do you foresee happening after this research launch? Especially, I guess what I'm trying to see is in the 5-year and 10-year plan, as you also highlight, this is a cross-cutting issue that requires multifaceted intervention. So what do you see as tangible expected outcome? What do you plan for, like, some of the projects so that this strategy, this research can be put into practice for the effort to carry on and expand? So we hear about some of the work that you are doing, like the grandmother inclusive approach. You also talk about climate change preparedness, other things which was mentioned by Pepe, the solution for people to stay and the solution for people to move. I think this is also a very important element to this, and the role of that that contribute to climate vulnerability for women and children, etc. Regularization in destination and origin countries. So that's the first part of the question, the 5-year plan, 10-year plan. And then the second part is really more of a reflections and maybe opportunity. So as I mentioned, having academic background, I see, and as it also reflecting to the point that you mentioned, like the important role of the youth in addressing climate change. So this is the climate problem is the problem that is affecting them directly. And we are seeing that the younger generation are gaining passions in understanding this problem that directly affect them, but there's still a lack of understanding. I think a lot of the youth understand, okay, climate change, weather patterns, flood, etc., but they don't really understand to an extent of how it has such a impact on children, how it's impact migration, etc. So I wanted to ask, since I haven't yet heard about your plan to involve academic institutions besides the research itself, like how do you plan to, if you plan to get the students to involve in this? And I understand like partnership with university and stuff like that. So I understand that there's always a question with funding, but there are universities and students who are willing and able to carry this the cost and the conversation that happen in the classroom. It is and outside of the classroom is something that I think it's so important. So these are my questions.
Great question. Thanks so much. So briefly, from World Vision, we are looking at a couple of things beyond this research. One of them, we will be working with our country programs to look at the country strategy refresh times or seasons to make sure that they're including or integrating the recommendations that have come from the research, but also looking at enabling partnerships with other agencies that are in this field so that we are working on this front together. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. And then the second one, we're also looking at, so one of the deliverables beyond the research was policy briefs. So we're looking at policy advocacy at the country government levels, as well as implementation on the ground. And then, of course, engaging bodies at the ASEAN level. So thanks for the invitation. We're so much honored to be coming and partnering with you in this work. So that's the second piece that we're looking. And then we'll double click into the research to focus on some of the issues that need further investigation. I think working with research institutions, academic institutions like you're sharing, but also really looking at how best to continue bringing up the voices of the young people, our children, like C that was here. So these are the kind, 3 things that we're looking at. Our strategy periods are usually 3 to 5 years. So we're hoping that as countries reflect on what has come out, they'll be looking at prioritizing these issues into the next strategy cycles. So I hope that briefly answers your question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm Joydeep Gupta from the Internews Earth Journalism Network. 2 quick questions. The first one is to the report's authors. After a quick glance, what I am missing in this report is an explicit evidence of climate change worsening the situation. I mean, for example, just numbers on the increasing numbers of floods and droughts would have done that. Do you have that data? And if so, I would love to have that. My second question is to the panelists from IOM and UNICEF. Specifically, you know that despite efforts by your organizations for many years, governments at the climate COPs have consistently refused to have climate refugees recognized as refugees. How's that affecting your work, especially for children? And if that came through, how would it help you?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question, which is one we often get when we're talking about climate and migration, because somehow there seems to be an idea that you can correlate the magnitude of climate hazards to the numbers of migration. Unfortunately, migration is never driven by a single factor. Even in the case of very sudden onset disasters, whether people move or go depends on their underlying vulnerability, on their resilience, their capacity to adapt, the legal pathways available to them, etc. So how we like to frame this issue is that there isn't really such a thing as a climate migrant. So could the first climate migrant please stand up? Because the reality is that in exactly the same hazard zone, in exactly the same age group, etc., whether you can move or not depends on your vulnerability, on your access to infrastructure, on many other things. So while climate change is clearly a threat multiplier, and there's many different pathways in which climate change is making distress migration more pronounced, climate change will render many places on Earth uninhabitable, but also because we are letting it. It's about, the vulnerability doesn't fall from the sky factor. So therefore, also the nomenclature of climate refugees is actually not accepted in the Geneva Convention. The 1951 Convention on Refugees doesn't consider climate change. And we could only try to consider climate change in that convention if we were to see climate change as a form of persecution inflicted on the poor. There would be a moral case for that, but opening the Refugee Convention to such conversations is also dangerous because you might get states pulling out of the convention. So in the report, we do have in the full report, maybe not in the short version, we have examples of climate data, climate scenarios, projections for these countries. However, what you will not find is some kind of figure that can become problematic, and I'm very happy to explain more further. Thank you so much.
So I am not an expert on the climate refugee, climate migration conversation. So whatever I'm saying here now, take it with a pinch of margin of error. But I think from IOM's perspective as well, the conversation right now on whether someone should be recognized as a climate refugee is not particularly useful with regards to dealing with the realities of everyday migration. And, if you think about, apart from the low-lying Pacific island countries and some other island nations in the Indian Ocean, you don't have that many countries where return due to climate change is absolutely not possible, right? Just whether the return to your communities of origin is possible versus somewhere else in that country with some other adaptation programs that would allow you to have a livelihood in some other way. If agriculture in the coastal areas of Bangladesh is no longer possible, then perhaps there is some other way of having a livelihood in the urban centers. But that would obviously require a high level of sort of adaptation-led policies and strategies by these governments, which we're not necessarily yet seeing. We are supporting the Pacific Island nations with regards to having a kind of a migration governance strategy that does discuss the possibility of permanent migration. And then that kind of brings into the question of what sort of visas exist out there, for example, and how can you slowly go from a labor visa to a permanent residency to something else. And, how is that pathway open to those who absolutely cannot return home? But that's not yet the majority of the migrants out there.
On the question regarding the government pushback and implementation of policies that include child migrants or refugees, I'd like to just maybe mention that Convention on the Rights of the Child is the single international human rights treaty that is universally ratified, with the exception of one country. So just reminding of the governments of their duty to protect, fulfill, and respect the rights of these children. And For this end, we work with governments, national governments through our country offices, through advocacy, but also supporting, creation of inclusive systems, doing costing, and really also using the argument of economic benefit, right? What is the benefit of actually developing and opening this resource access to services to these children, and why this is going to be beneficial in the long run for the country and for the refugees or the migrant populations. Yeah.
May I add a little bit the announcement that last week Thailand has sent an official letter to the UN to withdraw the reservation on the protection of child refugee, the last reservation on CRC. So it means that from now on, Thailand can protect all the refugee children. Yes, this is the last reservation that we withdraw officially on the 30th of August.
I think our next question is from Alexandra. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. Thanks very much for the report and for the presentations. Alexandra Mate with the Care Asia Regional Office. Maybe 2 points. One for the research team. Excellent report, and I'm really looking forward for the full extended version. But in the interest of this discussion, I would be very much interested to know whether you looked at the gender disparities on the impact of climate vulnerabilities on children. As we know, girls are affected differently than boys, as well as, the difference between women or the households that are primarily led by women. So I'd be interested if you can share a little bit about those findings. That's one. And the second thing is that we do talk a lot about refugees and then migration, which seem to be like separate blocks, of course, different conventions and different discussions. However, what we know from the field is that the vulnerabilities of the people on the move change, right? So even if they, let's say, predominantly leave their country of origin on grounds of economic hardships and others, their vulnerabilities change. So we're really talking about mixed migration, right? And we have been seeing a different, let's say, practices of host governments in the ways they treat children and in the ways they accept them, including detention of what they call irregular migrants or illegal migrants, and that applies to children. So I'd be interested to hear if this is something you're going to be looking at potentially at the midterm review of the action plan or the different discussions. So I'd be very curious to hear about that from colleagues from IOM and UNICEF. And then my last point maybe is, because I failed to see in the report recommendation, but maybe they are not included here, it's on the legal frameworks, because we talk about protection frameworks and legal assistance, but we do talk about it in different separate ways, from country of origin to country, host country. But there are countries in transit as well, that's one. And then we also look at different points along the route that we know whether they are legal or not, or irregular. So I'll be very interested to hear your views on that, and how that could be materialized or sort of pushed forward in those discussions with different stakeholders. So yeah, that's my last point. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. And just for time, we'll take one response to each question. So yeah, Sarah or Claire, whoever wants to take that one.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your question. I'll just answer the first one. Yes, definitely in the full report, we do go into gender differences, both in determining who migrates, right? Because these decisions are not happening in a vacuum, like Sarah said. Gender disparities are contributing towards decisions over who's going to migrate, who gets access to work opportunities, who has to stay home and care for the children, do household labor, etc. And so that does come out in the report. And also throughout, we purposefully took an intersectional approach And so we're not just looking at how, people of different genders are impacted differently or they have different adaptive capacities, but rather we're looking at differences along class lines, along ethnicities, along ability, et cetera. So definitely encourage you to look at the full report for that. And then also we see the ways in which gendered expectations also around the family are shifting burdens for children. For example, one thing that came out strongly is just the responsibility that young boys in particular feel to help their family financially. And that's something that often becomes invisible in the face of also the additional care responsibilities, right, the young girls might be facing. But we need also, supportive mechanisms to protect these young boys from issues like we had one case actually of trafficking where a young boy had to support his grandfather's health debts. And they also were a landless family, and so they had limited opportunities. And in the face of increasing environmental shocks, then he was vulnerable to trafficking. And he felt too that he had the responsibility, right, to be helping his family. So we need to be considerate and cognizant of these different gender differences when we're framing this approach. So thank you very much for your question, and please do read the full report for more.
And I just wanted to add here, there was also a mentioning about the role of girls, like they taking caretaking roles or, taking care of the household. I think it's really important to also realize that the different impact of climate change induced migration on boys and girls. In terms of the midterm review on the implementation of the regional plan of action, progress and achievement on A2D is part of that. Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for raising that. And we do invite you as well to participate in this process. I mean, all the partners and organizations who are willing to contribute to doing the, stock taking and reviewing the progress in these terms. Yeah, you're welcome to join it. Yeah, we will circulate the information later.
And then just quickly on the mixed migration issues. I mean, we certainly see that vulnerability often increases during the migration journey, right? And one of the challenges that we face is that the way that states prefer to govern irregular migration is really, there's only really one way, and it is detention, immigration detention and deportation or voluntary return, right? But it is always based on the idea that the migrant will return. And so we are advocating and doing a lot of work in this space to try to introduce the idea of vulnerability screenings. So really just trying to understand, why are these people in irregular settings? Might they be victims of trafficking? Might there be other types of exploitation that have happened? Might there be reasons why they cannot return home, and then have tailored solutions? But it is still a bit of a struggle because we are kind of coming across state sovereignty issues when we start talking about this. But we've seen some promising practice. I mean, just in terms of, for example, in Australia, there's now a new visa regime for those who have been exploited or victims of trafficking, which allows them to stay. So, I mean, we're hoping to see more and more of this also when it comes to climate migrants, but early days.
May I add a little bit on that, because ASEAN have a lot of have several projects on gender mainstreaming to address with sensitive approach to women and children in the that affected by climate change and natural disasters. So if you interested, we can have a off time talk.
I think we are at time, but I want to take just a couple more questions since I've seen hands up, if that's okay for everyone. So Kun Patra, I believe, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Patrulekha Chatterjee. I write on migration, children, and climate change vulnerability. I've actually covered the HIV epidemic, AIDS epidemic in this region for decades now. Most of my work was in South Asia, but now I'm in Bangkok and very interested to read this report. So, I was really interested in this, the detail, the granular stories about children dropping out of school or not being able to access. So my question is, so this whole poly crisis, is it also at one level, or could be potentially, an education crisis? And related to that is, what Kun Vanchai said, very interested to know that Thailand actually offers this access to education to even migrant children. And I don't think many countries do that. So that's excellent, great news. So if that is so, then my question is access to health, access to education does exist and it is being advertised, as you said. So then what are the reasons why these people are not putting that it's free, it's accessible, you won't get deported, in which case, what are the factors, which is impeding, why are the children not being sent to school or drop out? Thank you so much.
Just very quickly and just speaking, thank you very much for the question. Just speaking from what was coming out of our report. So there were two fundamental reasons. The first one was that these very, very poor marginalized communities, when the parents do come to Thailand, they're not taking the child with them to put them through school. These are families that need extra hands. They need extra money. They need the children too. They need the children to work. It's as sad as that, but it's as simple as that. And really, can we blame those parents, or is it something else that they can do? Of course, I'm convinced there's been a lot of regulation. You're not allowed in certain sectors. For example, it's going to be very strange to find child labor in big factories, in sectors that are regulated, even big industrial sectors. We did a study with IOM last year as well, looking at agriculture, for example, and plantations. You don't see children in big plantations. Where they're working is in small farms, in domestic labor. They're picking garbage. They are painting somebody's house. They are doing all these tasks because the reason they're going, it's not to get schooling or to learn Thai, right? They need to help their families survive. That's number one. And number two is this issue of, it's great to have this policy. And as I was saying, and I do understand that, of course, the information to local leaders is key because people don't trust the government. They trust more local leaders. From our experience, from the people that we interviewed, we felt that many didn't necessarily know, but it could be a mix of not knowing, fear potentially of deportation, even if the policy is such, because they don't have access to that information. They're very marginalized, they're confined. We're not talking about the middle-class kids here. So those children's parents would also, in that extent, fear it, and also linked to regulations such as the MOU. So you're not allowed to stay indefinitely in Thailand, right? You have to return after a couple of years. What's the point in my kid learning Thai for 2 years, and then I've got to bring him back, and then so maybe it's better that he just stays home. I'm going to potentially disrupt their education more. I think there's so many factors to your questions, but I would say those would be the ones that I remember clearly.
I have one more. So particularly in the border communities, the migration is super circular. People come for 3 months with the border passes and then go back. It's kind of based on agricultural cycles and crop cycles and so on. And so even if the children come with them, they might just come for 3 months and then go back. So there are language barriers, but also that continuity of it isn't perceived to be useful to put them to school for a bit in Thailand, then a bit in Cambodia, and then that just leads into complete dropout.
If I can just add very quickly to this too, in our report too, I don't think we see too many cases of permanent dropout. What we see is, like you just said before, the circular migration is that they're temporarily missing school for like 2 or 3 months, then they get bad grades, and then it's contributing towards reasons why then they would want to go and engage in labor, wage labor instead. And so it's these like types of like circular migration too that like we need to be fitting the solutions for.
Let me add to this. In the big migrant community like Samut Sakhon, Ranong, and whatsoever, we allow them to have a school, which the government control curriculum, but they can study not only Thai, but their own language as well.
Let's answer this. I'll be very brief. I think just one other thing I'd add. Obviously, the policy developments at the regional and at national levels have been very, very encouraging and really important. But I do think there is still a significant discrepancy between what the policy says and the implementation of those policies. For example, policy is that migrants can, including irregular migrants, can purchase health insurance in Thailand, but most hospitals in Bangkok don't sell that health insurance card. So the policy and the implementation of that policy is there's quite a discrepancy there. And so I don't think it's just about migrants not knowing they have these rights, but the actual implementation of the policy as well. In some cases, not everywhere, but in some cases, there's a lot of work to be done in that space.
And just to add, another reason for exclusion from these services could also be xenophobia and discrimination that they face. Yeah. So it's important to address stigma and discrimination to make sure that, even if these services are available, that these children would actually go and use those services.
This is a great discussion, and we do have a lot of chat happening in the virtual participants room as well. So this question is for Pepi. We are now in the middle of the regional and global review on the implementation of Global Compact on Migration, how this global commitment could support climate-induced migration. How can the global commitment better support climate-induced migration? Sorry, I think it's the Global Compact.
Yeah, so
commitment.
Obviously, this is something that the Global Compact looks at migration from all possible angles of migration, right? And tries to hold the signatory countries to advance those specific commitments. I don't think the Global Compact has anything very, very specific on climate-induced migration, but it covers all of these issues that we've discussed here today from the rights perspective, right? So whether that is the rights, access to justice or education for migrant children. And so this is how we would hold our member states to meet the commitments that they've made. And then we see the very, very specific work that happens, for example, under ASEAN that looks at how to contextualize some of that work into the ASEAN member states, like this ASEAN convention. So, and all of that will feature obviously in that midterm review.
And I think we have one final question.
Yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the World Vision for conducting that study and inviting us all. My name is Omer. I'm from Plan International. My very brief question is to the SEI team is that when I'm looking into the research goal, it says that understanding the context and then learn how governments and international communities can support and empower. So are there any recommendations, because thanks for taking us through all these human stories and what's happening, but how international community, and when I'm thinking about international communities, those who are contributing to these things, which are faced by these communities and children. So is there any recommendation on the, looking into the financing and the climate justice? So are there any recommendations on that? Thank you.
So thank you very much. We do have a policy brief available within for the international community. Of course, the challenge with these issues is that, in fact, a lot of these, of course, climate impacts are a consequence of transboundary climate risks, right? A lot of what the people are facing here, it's the consequence of historical emissions, historical exploitation, transboundary climate risks, trade agreements that are unequal and very problematic, which are plunging not only the individual families that we're speaking with into debt, but the governments. So there's a structural problem of multi-layered debt at many, many levels, from the individual to the household, to the national, etc. What happens in these kinds of studies that, you want to give recommendations to the particular government in charge, right? To say, Thailand, you should be doing, or Cambodia, you should be doing. And in a way, I think from a justice perspective, from a practical perspective, that's very important. You need to give practical recommendations of where they can be better. What happens there is that the international community gets left off the hook, as if it was the responsibility of Thailand historical emissions, as if it was the responsibility of Cambodia, Vietnam, etc. We do try to frame the report as much as possible within a social justice perspective. This is an issue of justice overall. But to be fair, it would look quite less pragmatic, as in international trade, etc. And this is something that we're trying to do at SEI also within our migration and mobility program, which is link much better particular national perspectives to much wider mechanisms of debt, if you want to look at trade agreements. And I think this is a really important cause of why people are not getting the prices they deserve for their crops, for example. And in fact, something that really drew my attention here, we were talking a lot about weather impacting crops as if it was a linear relationship, right? There's weather, there's less crops, and therefore people have less money, and therefore they migrate. Okay, so this is one common pathway. But actually, a very other common pathway is that you have people saying that they're like, yeah, the weather's terrible, but actually it doesn't, we're getting so little paid for our rice and our crops. The middlemen, there's years that it's devastating. We would expect to get very little money, but market, offer and demand. There's less offer, the price goes up. And then they have a wonderful year where the harvest is booming and the middleman comes and gives them peanuts for those crops. That is way outside of that circle, right? You've got to look at financial mechanisms way outside of the national level. That's something a bit complicated to do, but I think it's something important to stop trying to put the focus and the sole responsibility of what is happening in these countries. What is happening in these countries is the consequences of what the West continues to do to these countries. Thanks.
Well, we were running right on time up until this discussion, and I think it's actually a fantastic sign of how much interest there is to have this conversation, that we've extended the conversation for this long. I want to first of all just come back to a couple of questions that have been asked. Dr. Dikana and a couple of others had asked about what is World Vision going to do with this research next? And I think it's important to acknowledge right now we're consolidating, we're stock taking. What have we been doing? We have a lot of programs across the region that are addressing some of the root causes in terms of the push factor that are compelling people to migrate in distress, livelihoods programming and others. We haven't framed it in those terms previously. We think about them as livelihoods programs or disaster risk reduction. So we're doing that stock taking and reframing of our programs. We also have with us today 4 of our country directors, and I'd ask you just to stand up. Kun Sarawut from Thailand, Pakote from Vietnam, Adele from Laos, and Janice from Cambodia. And if you have more questions after this in terms of what are we doing at a specific country level, they can tell you how they're planning to take this forward. As Janice was just saying to me, we're taking the country-specific policy brief to the national level in Cambodia to advocate on these specific issues. So please do take the opportunity after this, grab a coffee, and just have a chat to any of them if you're interested. So now I know we're really kind of extending the graciousness of our panelists. And I do want to thank all of you for your time and for being here with us today. I want to thank C in particular for your willingness to share your amazing story and talent. And to Dr. Dikana's question earlier about, what is World Vision doing with youth and how are we engaging young people? C is a member of our advisory council for the Young Minds Camp. This is our flagship regional program for child leadership, and he is one of the first in our cohort this year. So we want to have more child leaders across the region that we're really investing in and empowering to make change for the future. So C, we just love seeing you here. So finally, I just want to thank everyone who's made the time to be here today, just to really prioritize. And I know we all make choices in terms of how to spend our time. The fact that you're here is just a testament to the fact that we're all interested in seeing how we can create greater impact. And so please do download the report, use the QR code. There's a lot of resources, including the policy brief that you can access. The full report as well has a lot more detail than what you see in this printed version. And if you are interested to have further conversations about collaboration, you've sparked some ideas today about possibilities for partnership, please take one of the business cards that's on your table and feel free to get in touch. We'd love to have that conversation with you. So thank you all. And with that, yeah, please go enjoy some coffee and have a look at the photos if you didn't have a chance before. Thank you.